Welcome back to the live studio for this next session on metagenomics to surveillance and what earlier pathogen detection can change. For years, metagenomics has been spoken about as the future of infectious disease detection. Now it's moving into NHS pathways, changing ICU decisions, and opening the way and entirely new approaches to do surveillance. But what does this mean for the clinicians, the laboratories, and ultimately the patient in the real world? Let's find out. Joining me today from the UK, we have Adela Medina, leading the implementation of clinical metagenomics across NHS pathways. Luke Snell, bringing metagenomics directly into frontline patient care. From the US, we have Kamil Kanapov, working on airborne surveillance and real-world deployment of sequencing systems. And from Australia, Rob Edwards, developing real-time response pipelines for pediatric respiratory infections in rural communities. Got it out there in the end. So over to you, Luke and Adela. Just want to discuss how metagenomics is changing in a clinical setting. And Adela, clinical labs have traditionally been used using targeted testing such as fragmented pathways and multiplex PCR. What has fundamentally changed now that metagenomics is entering in a routine setting?
So I will say that at the moment, because yes, we implemented this test a year ago, has not changed much, but I think this method is going to change the way we are working in clinical laboratories, because as you say, we have a battery of tests in the labs. We have a target PCR, multiplex PCRs, we have culture for mycobacterium, for bacteria, for fungi, and with this particular test that is able to detect any organisms in the sample, maybe we can change the way we are practicing. So basically we can put the test at the front of the diagnosis, and if it's negative, we can move to other kind of test that is more sensitive, like for example target PCR. So we'll reduce the battery of tests and assays that we are offering for diagnosis of infections.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And I guess one of the biggest challenges is trusting in the result. So how have you taken something that started as a translational pilot and make it reliable in a clinical setting?
Yeah, well, this has been a long way since the project started and the PhD than the implementation in the clinical lab. So basically we have been through, like I explained before in our talk, we have been through several set of validations with samples, setting thresholds for reporting to be sure we are not reporting false positive results, or we are missing or the test is not that sensitive that we cannot use in the clinical settings. We have been through the quality controls, validation, producing SOPs, and finally we went to the application for the UKAS accreditation of the test, and yeah, so it has been a long way.
Yeah. Okay, great. And over to you, Luke. From a clinical side, when a metagenomic result lands, in front of you, how does it change patient management?
Yeah, I think if we put it in context of what we already have, so if you think that up front you might do a PCR test, which is really targeted, but if that's negative, you're still wondering, is something there? So you've got to wait for the culture, which could take 48 hours or 5 days, or even longer in the case of fungi. So what we've done with metagenomics is put it really up front, at the front line. So when someone really sick comes into hospital, we do the metagenomics first to give us that agnostic, comprehensive view of what's going on. And really, I think what that provides you is some diagnostic clarification. So really, within 24 hours, you can get a good idea of what's going on with the patient, and that you can therefore kind of change your treatment accordingly. Mm-hmm. So it's really kind of changing the way that we're approaching diagnosis of infection in these patients.
Yeah, great.
Can I jump in and ask a question
sure.
there? So Luke, you mentioned fungi. One of the problems that we've run into is if somebody's already on an antifungal treatment, they don't culture fungi because that will kill them. Have you found that, and does the metagenomics help with something like that?
I mean, definitely we can detect organisms that have been pre-treated. I mean, we especially see that with bacteria in the community that have maybe had amoxicillin or co-amoxiclav. Oftentimes an organism like strep pneumo or strep pyogenes won't grow, but we'll find that in metagenomics. So I'm pretty confident that even pre-treatment doesn't necessarily preclude us detecting it. although we don't quite know how it affects the sensitivity of metagenomics, but certainly it's a better test than culture in those patients.
Excellent, thank you.
To double up on that question, do you think that as you're treating and some of your organisms are dying, how do you address that with metagenomics? And how do you separate out what's dead versus what you've just treated to be alive?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the method that we use in the NHS detects only intact organisms. So we're not detecting cell-free DNA or RNA. So we're pretty confident that if it's there and intact, so if we detect it, it's there and it's intact. We have done some small-scale longitudinal work showing that if you detect the pathogen and then start on targeted treatment and you repeat the metagenomics in 72 hours, often there'll be no signal for that organism in the data, which actually shows you that there's no longer any intact viable organisms there. So I think that is also the power of the method, that we're detecting only intact things and not just detecting cell-free remnant DNA. I don't know if you agree with that, Adela.
Yeah, I agree completely. So there has been always this debate about if you detect free DNA, what that means. So in this case, we don't have that problem because with that, we remove all the, or digest all the free DNA and RNA present in the sample. So yeah.
Okay, great. So moving on to deployment, access, and surveillance. Rob, you work in focusing on rapid pathogen detection in rural communities. What difference can this make in these remote settings where testing can be difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, in the UK, we think rural means somewhere halfway between London and Oxford, but in Australia, you know, we're working in Puente, which is Alice Springs. So it's about a 24 to 26 hour drive from the nearest large city. And so people have to fly to get treatment or to get diagnoses. Yep. And that's really not acceptable. And so if we can use some of the techniques that these guys have developed and things that we're trying to deploy with nanopore sequencing, we can take the sequencing technology to the patients. Yep. Do the diagnoses right there while the clinicians are there as well, and work with people to try and really affect treatments.
Exactly, and that's obviously a huge impact to those patients in those remote settings.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. And Camille, over to you. You're working on airborne surveillance systems. How important is environmental surveillance in going to be in detecting outbreaks as an early warning system?
I think that's going to be incredibly important because, one, you need to figure out what is an outbreak. Because a lot of times we have pathogens in the environment that are not outbreaks, they're just part of the environment. Here in the US, quite often, actually specifically in Texas, we get positive anthrax signatures based from the soil.
Wow.
And so if we're doing surveillance in Texas and we start seeing signatures of anthrax, does it just mean that it's been windy that day, or does it mean that there's an actual outbreak? And so understanding what's there on a continual basis versus what is an anomaly and what's different, I believe is going to be key in actually making those critical calls for, oh, something is going wrong and we need to act, versus, no, this is just part of our normal environment and we should continue our protocols as usual.
Sure. And from an implementation perspective, you know, what's the biggest practical barriers that you see making metagenomics work routinely, you know, especially in with the idea of detecting pathogens at events like the Boston Marathon?
I think the biggest issue actually probably cross-references quite a bit to Rob, where it's the ability of the end users to perform the tests independently. In an ideal case scenario, you want people who do not have to be trained in any specific way, where they can read a guide or watch a video and be able to do this on their own. And so that way they can start producing the data. I would say that's one of the things that Nanopore actually unlocks for a lot of people, is the accessibility to become your own citizen scientist and contribute your own data. So I could, in an imaginary scenario, for example, if you were in a rural region, I could imagine that there's a science teacher or someone who's interested in the overall technology to be kind of like the steward or the guardian for that area and be able to perform these procedures with less hands-on, with having minimal training, but being able to get you the results faster rather than waiting for the deployment. Those 24 to 48 hours could be critical.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So what comes next? So we've talked about metagenomics today. So looking ahead, Luke, how close do you think metagenomics is to becoming something, a clinical a clinician routinely expects as part of the standard of care?
Gosh, well, definitely in our centre they expect it as standard of care. I can say that
so
much.
we're there already.
Yeah. I think there's still some work to do on exactly which patients for which clinical indication and at what point of the pathway, but we're trying to do that work prospectively now.
Okay, great. So I think we're coming up to the end of time here. So quick fire, 45. What one line from each of you? What gives you the most confidence that metagenomics will become routine practice in the next few years, Rob?
Well, for me, of course, it's the awesome bioinformatics that we develop,
Okay.
but you need that sequencing technology underneath it too.
Okay, great. Adela?
And for me, it's the number of tests that the clinicians are requesting to us, so I think that is a good signal.
Okay, perfect.
It's the diagnostic clarification it provides.
I would say the ability to make calls that you weren't able to make before, whether environmental or clinical.
Okay, great. So metagenomics is no longer a research tool, it's becoming part of real decision making, real surveillance systems, and ultimately real patient outcomes. And thank you for joining us in the live studio.